Good morning. We're following the series in Frontline Wirral based around what Jesus said about certain subjects. And this morning, the subject I want to take, which I really feel God has laid on my heart, is what Jesus said about leadership. This is the preach slot, and it's always a risk, isn't it? Because preachers can be incredibly boring. A preacher is one, it is said, who speaks in somebody else's sleep. I remember my first bumbling attempt to preach many years ago when I was in my 20s. Actually only three things went wrong that day. The first was I read it. The second was I read it with a boring voice, and the third was it wasn't worth reading. I hope this morning goes a bit better than that. So what did Jesus say about leadership? Actually, it's worth just noting that Jesus modelled everything that he talked about. And so we'll look at some of his actions as well as some of his words today. But we're going to start off looking at a passage from Matthew 20 verses 20 to 28, which we also see in Mark 10. And we're going to go over to Rachel McHale, who's going to read that for us. Rachel.
Matthew chapter 20, verses 20 to 28, the New Living Translation. Then the mother of James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus with her sons. She knelt respectfully to ask a favour. "What is your request?" he asked. She replied, "In your kingdom, will you let my 2 sons sit at places of honour next to you, one at your right and the other at your left?" But Jesus told them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of sorrow that I am about to drink?" "Oh yes," they replied, "we are able." "You will indeed drink from it," he told them, "but I have no right to say who will sit on the thrones next to mine. My Father has prepared those places for the ones he has chosen." When the other 10 disciples heard what James and John had asked, they were indignant. But Jesus called them all together and said, "You know that in this world kings are tyrants, and officials lord over the people who are beneath them. But amongst you it should be quite different. Whoever wants to be the leader among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must become your slave. For even I, the Son of Man, came here not to be served, but to serve others and to give my life as a ransom for many."
Once Mara and I were on a plane going on holiday. It was actually, I think, a week or 2 after we had qualified as doctors, and my mum was with us, and it was with horrendous embarrassment that I heard her speaking with a loud voice to the air hostess who she'd collared and called over. And she said, in earshot of probably 2 or 3 rows in front and behind and across the aisle, that her son and daughter-in-law were here, and they had just qualified as doctors, and if anybody on the plane needed any medical attention, they were here to help them. Mothers just can't help themselves, can they? That's what it comes down to. Mothers just can't help showing pride in their children. And in this passage we see just that. This mum came to Jesus basically and said, "I think my boys are so special, they need a special treatment in heaven. Could you do that for them, please, Jesus?" And the other disciples were quite shocked and indignant, quite reasonably so. Then Jesus made this comparison. Exercising authority and lording it over others is not the kingdom way. The kingdom way is being a servant leader, just like Jesus. The rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, not so with you. Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. That's what Jesus was saying. And the fact is, the world teaches one model of leadership, and Jesus teaches another. In the world, we see Russell Crowe as master and commander, fighting for his life and for his men, and courageously taking risks. We see Donald Trump leading America in his leadership style. We see Putin cyber attacking the world with his leadership style. We see Kim Jong-un in North Korea, starving his people but living a lavish lifestyle. And this week we've seen the smouldering row between Cabinet Minister Richard Jenrick and his apparent influence by business tycoon Richard Desmond. BBC News described Desmond as a forceful leader. He's a 68-year-old business tycoon worth 2.6 billion, the founder of a lot of businesses, some of them quite dodgy, like Red Hot TV. The BBC comment was that he was used to having his way and forcing through his wishes. But looking at Jesus' words, that's not his way. So what does Jesus mean? How are we to be different? A bit earlier, Claire reminded us of the account of David and Goliath. Being different is our calling, not so that we're proud or weird. It's because we know we're the king's kids. And the king's kids can get up to stuff that we otherwise wouldn't be able to get up to if we were not the king's kids. So when we know who we are, there is no need for us to strut, no need for us to try and be who we're not, and no need for us to lord it over other people. When we know we're the king's kids, we know he lives in us, and we know he lives in other believers. And here's the thing. If in you Jesus lives, if I serve you, I'm serving the Jesus living within you. That's a privilege. That's a joy. You get it? That the whole business of our faith, according to Jesus, is to love God with all of our heart, soul and mind, and to love others as we love ourselves. Twofold, loving God, loving others. We demonstrate our love for God as we love others, I think Jesus is saying. We can't say, I love God, but I don't love my neighbour. And the reason we can love others, particularly the Christians who we would lead, is that Jesus is in you. We can love everybody, actually, because they've been created by Jesus. They're made in God's image, and we're serving the wonderful God by loving other people. There's a Greek word from which we get the word charismatic, charis, C-H-A-R-I-S, and it means grace, kindness, imparting life. If you wanted to put it in a sentence, to demonstrate charis means that you're more pleasant to somebody than you need to be. You're so winsome that they want to come back for more. That's the Jesus way. It's a great way to be a servant leader. When I was clinical lead in A&E, which I was for a number of years, one of the great motivators for me as a Christian at work was to make everybody's experience as good as I could make it. I wanted people to be excited about coming to work. I wanted people to go home at the end of the day feeling pleased, even though the work might have been grueling, because the way we treat our staff, it seemed to me, was quite key. The fact that I could know their names, know their spouses' names and their children's names, and what they were getting up to and what their concerns were. And I would be praying for my staff. I wouldn't tell them necessarily, but it helped me to just generate more and more concern for them as I noted things mentally and prayed for them. As we were on first name terms, as we socialised a little together, as we told stories to each other and had a bit of a fun time and a bit of banter, it made people's experience of work that much better. And we can all do that with each other as we serve one another and as we seek to produce that winsomeness where people want to come back for more. I said at the start that we would look at some of Jesus' actions as well as the words we've looked at, because there's many of them. When I say it, you'll realise he saw the potential in each person that he met, and he sought to draw it out. For instance, the woman at the well. For instance, Matthew, the tax cheat. For instance, Mary, the prostitute. In each one, he saw who they could be, and he wants to draw it out. And many more, probably everybody that he met. But here's an example of something that he did. The Last Supper is detailed in all the Gospels, actually. It's really described in 3. And in John's Gospel, it's not so much described, but it is referred to in John 13. And the Pesach, Passover, as it's called, the Haggadah, is a ritual that the Jewish people went through and still go through now. And as part of that ritual, you get to where there are 2 ritual washings of hands, actually, but you get to the washing of hands. And at that point, Jesus took off some of his robes, wrapped a towel around himself, and instead of the disciples washing their hands ritually, Jesus went and washed their feet. He went beyond what he needed to do. He was more pleasant than he needed to have been, and he was winsome. So I'm sure they would have wanted that to happen again. They would have talked about it in the days and months that followed, saying, wasn't that an amazing thing to be served by the creator of the universe? That's an example of charis. That's an example of servant leadership. That's who we're meant to be as Christians. We may not all be leaders, but in our own way, we can demonstrate the same quality of serving one another. And if we are leaders, we get a greater opportunity to serve one another and show each other the Jesus way.